Do you think young people are more persuadable or less persuadable now?
I mean, I think like young people is such a huge category. I think a lot of young people are are more persuadable, right? Like if you look at even, we're talking the day after Trump
Yes.
got 34 counts, of which he was convicted on, all of them. And when you dig into the
She's
data,
smiling. There's
yes,
quite the smile there.
I mean, it's nice to see justice. It's nice to see our justice system work.
Yeah, for everyone.
Yeah,
Like,
well, but it doesn't always work for everyone, right? And to see it particularly doesn't work for people of wealth and white men and power.
rich white men who now
Yes.
have the ability to like bash the judge and continue to do things that the rest of us would get locked up for.
Yeah. And so to see him convicted by 12 people unanimously, yeah, it's nice to see that. So yeah, it puts a smile on my face. I think we're talking the day after, and we look at, if you break down by age, I'm just kind of quoting the New York Times here, but I think people over 65, just 2% said that a guilty conviction would change their viewpoint or like how they would vote, right? And then when you look at young people, how many young people were even paying attention to it was only 10%. And I don't remember the number off my tongue, but it was a lot larger than 2%. Especially for like younger Black folks, you saw double digits that said, if it were a guilty verdict, I would not vote for him at all, right? And these were people that were going to vote for him. So yeah. I think there are a lot of young people that are persuadable, because young people are very clear that they don't like the world they're inheriting and they want to change it. This is a very educated population, but they are persuadable to turn out. And just like any other population, historically, like if you spend more money and time talking to someone, they are more likely to turn out. And historically, we have not put very much time or money into young people. So there's a lot of return on investment in this country when you invest in young people, and not just for an election cycle. Like this is about winning the future of the country long term, which is why you have Vivek Ramaswamy and others saying like, hey, we need to, after 2022, that was a scary result for us. Yeah. Let's raise the voting age. Let's make it harder for them to vote. Let's make sure you can't vote on a college campus. All of these things to restrict the largest, most diverse generation in American history from accessing their most basic right, which is the right to vote.
Young people have been really outspoken about the conflict in Gaza and what seems to be a growing genocide. How do you think the administration is going to be able to rectify their stance with young people? Because it feels like the longer this goes on, the more it erodes support.
Yeah, I think that when we think about how much the Biden administration has delivered on student debt, climate change, gun safety, nominating the first Black woman to serve on the Supreme Court justice, things that are very popular with young people, where they've stood on gay marriage, abortion access. And then on this issue, they're very much out of step with the majority of the Democratic base at this point, and especially with young people. Certain polls will show you that 70% disapproval rate nearly for the administration's handling of the conflict. 35,000 people dead, tens of thousands have injured. Many young people have seen the images of the huge human cost of what's happened in Gaza. So I think, a lot of young people, and especially a lot of young people online that are very progressive and politicized, are upset, and rightfully so, as they should be. And our organization has called for a ceasefire and a release of all the hostages. We've called on the administration to listen to young people on this issue. We did see polling in 2022, and this is when the conflict in Ukraine is at the forefront, that 4% of young people at that time said that foreign policy was going to be an important issue in the upcoming election. Well, asked just a few months ago how important foreign policy was, 4% in 2022, 84% of young people said foreign policy, specifically around Gaza, was going to be an important issue. That being said, we're seeing 4% of young people say that this will be the issue that they vote on. And this will be the one issue that they vote on. So I think it's important for the administration to listen. Margins matter in this election. And we're seeing the top issues be around abortion, democracy, and the economy. And when you talk about the economy and the positions around being pro-labor, taxing the rich their fair share, raising the minimum wage to a living wage, equal pay for women's work, which are all the Biden administration's policies on the economy. These are issues that the Biden administration can win with young people.
As you talk to young people, do they realize how big of a role AI could be in displacing workers? Because I think that's something that I don't think has really been talked about a lot in this election cycle.
It's not something that I personally, or something that's come up in our work yet. I think that I think young people generally have a lot of anxiety about the future around around climate change, also around the economy, and so anything that will make, you have two camps, right? I think there's folks that believe AI could make our lives easier and better. And there's folks that, and I think I put myself in the second camp, that have a lot of questions and concerns about what AI will do, especially when we think about the release of social media without thinking through the long-term consequences, right? And we know, especially with the release of social media and the long-term impacts on people's mental health, extreme division in the country, misinformation and disinformation, the threats to democracy, on and on, that you can't just look at the benefits, you have to look at the consequences as well. And we know that policy doesn't always catch up with that. But I think young people have inherited a pretty raw deal, economically speaking, but I think that a lot of folks understand that has been a buildup over the years. We've seen the Biden administration really move. Go back even 10 years ago, it wasn't like Democrats were talking, except, the farther left of the Democratic Party were talking about taxing the rich. Yeah. Their fair share. It wasn't until people's movements like Occupy Wall Street that people started talking about, we want an economy for Main Street, not Wall Street, right? We want an economy for the 99%, not the top 1%. So this is a very progressive generation as far as the economy that they want to build, because it's much harder to buy a home. There's not a lot of economic security for this generation, and they're rightfully angry about the world they're inheriting.
Yeah, I think back to my mama always comments, our generation, I could not buy the house my mom lives in right now. I could not afford that. And that is supposed to be the American dream, that you were supposed to do better than our parents. Mm-hmm. It doesn't feel that this generation is going to get that opportunity. What is it about the Biden administration, or what can the Biden administration do to make young voters feel more confident about their future?
I think the Biden administration has done a lot, but I think it is a huge deal to cancel $167 billion in student debt, Absolutely. Especially after the Supreme Court justices that are mostly Republican and appointed by Republicans try and tell you you're legally not allowed, and trying to figure out every maneuverable way possible. I think continuing to stand with labor unions is a huge deal, right? We're seeing the highest support of labor unions since the 1940s, 50s in this country, especially young people. 88% of young people support labor unions. 88% of people.
That's incredible.
So that's Republicans, because there aren't 88% of young people are not Republicans. All Democrats. So that includes Republicans. So I think the economic policies are really popular, and making sure to just continue to hit the villains that have created and structured this economy. As it is, we know that there are so many companies that have profited off of creating a false inflation, right, for their products, that they didn't have to raise prices, but they wanted to, right? Or they could make the can of beans 15 ounces versus 16 ounces, shrink our chips, just to make more and more off margins that were completely unnecessary, right? I think I saw
greedflation, I think is what they call it now.
Yeah. So, I think continuing to make sure that people are answering to try and build an economy that understands that it shouldn't be just judged by the GDP and unemployment or how well big corporations are doing, but we should judge our economy by how well ordinary people are doing.
The courts and corporations are really intertwined, and it's becoming more apparent kind of by the day. So What role do you think corruption and the courts is going to play in the young vote? I know abortion has been something that's really been talked about, but not the courts in just a broader sense.
I think a lot of young people post Roe really started to pay attention to the Supreme Court. It was like, I think you had to be a more astute political observer to be like, oh yeah, the president appoints the Supreme Court and then like make decisions and they
Mm-hmm.
impact all of us. But if you're, what we saw in 2022, especially for young women, you take away someone's rights and take them back 50 years over one of the most critical decisions they can have, which is when they
Yeah.
get to decide to make a family or over their health care, they get pretty pissed off and they start to pay attention. And so we see a lot more young people talking about the Supreme Court. You look at in Wisconsin, an off election, how many young people paid attention to the state Supreme Court? Let me tell you, that was because of abortion and seeing what a radical extreme right wing court could produce. And this election, I think, which will be unique, is for the first time, we're really seeing young men also being mobilized by abortion. I jokingly say, but not so jokingly say, it took them about 9 months to catch up with this issue.
I like that. You made me snort.
In 2022, it was like women were like super pissed and angry about it. It was mostly come up for men, but not really. And then in this election, we're like, they're very motivated by it.
We're not that smart. It takes us a little while,
It's a little while to be like, oh, I am now responsible. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, also when you think of the court, though, I mean, this is an anti-union court, anti-labor court,
Anti-environmental court.
Yeah, anti-voting court. Like, this court has literally become the new legislative court. Everything that they're not able to do in Congress, they're using the courts to do. Do you think Democrats are going to get to the point where we can start creating our judicial bench that we can curate just like Republicans do?
I think I think we just passed a pretty critical mark. I think it was like 200 and something plus judges that Biden, federal court justices that he had appointed. It was something that Democrats paid a lot more attention to, right? Seeing that a whole cohort of justices under Trump were really pushed forward. Of course, they blocked a lot of Obama being able to push forward justices and get them appointed. But it was something that Democrats have placed a real premium of focus on. I think when we get to the Supreme Court, I think there's a whole nother level of strategy that, look, Republicans, they've been appointing very, very young judges. These are lifetime appointments. So they are looking at long term. They've also created their own threshold by the ultra right about who gets to go into these positions, and looking at how loyal they will be to that right wing agenda. And I think that we have to get a lot smarter. And there's also things that, there's nothing that says there only has to be 9 Supreme Court justices. So it is something that could be expanded and looked at as well.